T-shirts in the back for sale. We have buttons. We have lawn signs, which you can sign up for and take home. Lawn signs are a great way to show your neighbors and people on the island that the green support is strong and rising. This campaign, part of it is giving people permission. So many people are green and they kind of feel that they don't have permission. We're giving people permission to go for it. When is the last time, I can answer this, never, that you could actually vote without fear? This is an amazing experience that we have. First time in the life of most people, possibly all the voters in this region, where they could actually vote without any fear. This is an election of no consequence. There's only one consequential result that can come out of this election, and that's doubling the Green Party caucus in Ottawa. Any other result in this election is just boring status quo. That's the reality. And we can make it happen. We are making it happen. You guys live here on this beautiful island, which I used to live here, actually. 2001 to 2004, I lived here as part of the boat building community in Silva Bay. It was fun. There's a few people here that I know from back then. I know Paul and Sipora from back then, and EJ, and I think there's a few other people here that I know from back then. Those were fun times. In Nanaimo, it's crazy. In most areas of Nanaimo, the only signs that you can see are Green Party signs at this moment. It's probably going to change, but I don't know. And we have people between 5 and 10 people come into our office every single day to grab signs. And the beautiful thing about it, because I ran Paul's campaign in 2015, the beautiful thing about the people who are coming in, the 5 to 10 people a day who are coming in to grab signs, is that I don't know any of them. I've never seen them. I don't recognize their names. They're coming in, lots of them are coming in and saying, you know, I've been voting Liberal my whole life, I've been voting NDP my whole life, I am done. In this election, I am going green. And many of them are cutting checks. Most of the checks are $50, $100 checks, but yesterday somebody came in that I never recognized, gave us a $500 check. It's amazing. It's so inspiring and so hopeful. Back when I was living on Gabriola, I was actually a non-voter. I was a very angry young anarchist. I was at war with the system and with government and with all authority institutions. And for me, actually, to get inspired to the level that I am, to the level that I got inspired in 2015, to be working 70 to 90 hours a week, hardly sleeping, the last thing I think about when I go to sleep at night is this campaign. And the first thing I think about when I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and then manage to fall back to sleep and wake up again at 6 o'clock in the morning is this campaign. And I get up and I'm typing ideas and messaging. And for me to get inspired at this level, to be part of this level of political engagement, it's not just the ideas. It's like I would not be actually doing this, I don't think, for anybody but Paul Manley and Elizabeth May. So it's a great honor. Thank you. So I think now I've done a little bit of off-the-cuff entertaining while we wait, but I think we can probably start, right? So if everybody who is standing would like to take a seat, that would be great. All right, so I said a few things. I'm going to say a few other things now that we're officially starting. As I said, in 2015, I managed Paul's campaign as well. I have known Paul for 15 years as a friend. I do want to recognize that we are on unceded Nanaimo First Nations territory, and give great thanks and appreciation and respect to what they have gone through and have been going through, and for their patience with us, for being here and for their welcoming. So thank you for that. And so as I said, in 2015 I was Paul's campaign manager. And sorry? My name is Ilan Goldenblatt. Thank you. And I was Paul's campaign manager in 2015, and we worked really hard, and it was really hopeful, and we got swept at the end by the Liberal wave and by the fear of Harper. And at the end of it, I swore that I would never do it again. Paul, on the other hand, kept his campaign signs. The vast majority of the signs out there are recycled 2015 campaign signs because we are green. And I know that actually one of our volunteers in 2015 who was on our sign team, I came to his house a week after the campaign, and he was roofing his shed with the sign teams of the Liberals and the Conservative candidates with their big 4x4 sign teams. And I was like, oh, I guess those guys are not going to run again or going to spend a whole bunch of money and plastic on new signs. But Paul saved his signs. And when a few months ago I was out of the country and I got an email from a friend with the news that Sheila Malcolmson was stepping down, and I was like, uh-oh. I sent Paul a message asking Paul, are you going to do anything about this? And he's like, yep, I'm running, but I told the Green Party that you don't want to manage again. I was like, well, I don't want to manage against Sheila as an incumbent, but an open seat, I guess we're going to have to do this again. And so I stepped up and did it. And it's a very exciting time because the difference between what's happening right now and what was going on in 2015, there's several, and they're all playing in our favor. Number one, the most important one, is that the consciousness, the awareness, the understanding of climate change and of the environmental degradation has risen by orders of magnitude. A day does not go by that we don't hear the CBC talking about it, that we don't read about it in every mainstream media outlet, and we're finally taking it seriously. In 2015, I had Google News alerts on my email for all kinds of stuff, and sometimes a week would go by and climate change would not be mentioned in the mainstream media. So now there's finally an understanding of it, of the magnitude of it. Number two, we don't have Harper. Harper was such a huge boogeyman of fear that it shut down people's capacity to think, to hope, to feel. It was just anything but Harper. And the Liberals have lost their shine. There's not going to be a Liberal sweep. The NDP, I used to be an NDP member. I say this with no joy, but they have not been able to gain traction. Jagmeet has not been able yet to connect with Canadians. Here in Nanaimo Ladysmith, they're launching their campaign today. We've been running we've been running our campaign since February 3rd. The NDP say that they didn't know that a by-election was going to be called. They are the ones who stepped down. Everybody else knew that a by-election was going to be called. So that, I say this with no joy. I am the Green Party campaign manager and I want to win, but I also I'd like to see a strong NDP, and I think NDP would be my second choice. But the last thing is that our campaign team here and the team in Ottawa are that much more experienced. In 2015, Paul was a first-time candidate, I was a first-time campaign manager. Everybody else pretty much on the team had never done it before. This time we have a lot more understanding. Our lists are much bigger. In 2015 we started with nothing. We didn't have donors, we didn't have people to take lawn signs. Now in 2015 we gave out 1,500 lawn signs. We have the names of all those people. We've been calling them up. They're like, yes, I'll take a sign again. In our campaign launch event, which I targeted to raise $6,000 to $10,000, in 20 minutes we raised $25,000 on February 3rd. Because people are ready. So, now before I pass the mic on, I'm going to explain a little bit of what's going to happen. When I'm done, I'm going to introduce Paul. After Paul, there's going to be a special local guest who's going to introduce Elizabeth. And then once Elizabeth is done, we're going to invite Russell Cooey, the Green Party candidate for Victoria, to come up and moderate be the moderator for the questions and answers. I also want to make sure that everybody is aware that our volunteer coordinator, where are you, Caitlin? Our wonderful volunteer coordinator, Caitlin Bryce, who's doing an amazing job, is here, and we need to beef up our Gabriola team. We already have an amazing team on Gabriola. That's why we have already all the signs. That's why some of you guys might have already been door knocked. But we need to beef it up because this is how we're going to win. We're going to win by talking to our neighbors. We're going to win by talking to our community. So really, if you have, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time, if you have an hour, 3 hours to give, We'd love it if you came out with us door knocking. And door knocking, just to be really clear to explain to you guys, door knocking is not about persuasion. We're not trying to sell the Green Party when we're door knocking. We're not harassing people. You can come out door knocking with us and just hold the clipboard. You don't have to say anything. It's actually a fun experience. The reception, I've now door knocked twice, 2 days on Gabriola, 2 weekends in a row. The reception's been amazing. Like, nobody has been mean or negative or anything. People have been super happy to see us and friendly. So please sign up with Caitlin in the back for volunteering and help Paul win. This is how we're going to win. And now I want to introduce Paul. As I said, I've known Paul for 15 years. We've been close friends. We've done a lot of political things as well together. Paul has been a super generous, solid, consistent friend to me. I've stayed at his house for long periods of time when I was out of a place to live or in between travel. And for me, the reason why I'm working for Paul, as I say, coming from a place of deep cynicism and jadedness, is because he's really one of the people with the deepest integrity that I know. He's so not about personal gain and about his own aggrandizement. Everything about Paul's life and career has been about making the world a better place. And he's also a really loving person with a great sense of humor. And that combination to me is just irresistible. And that's why I'm working, busting my behind to get this man elected. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our next MP, the first Green MP who's going to double the Green Caucus in Ottawa. Paul Manley.
Thank you very much for coming out. I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation, and thank them for taking care of this land and welcoming us here. I do a lot of work with Snuneymuxw as part of my respect for that nation, doing elder stories and documenting things that go on in their community. And I've learned a lot from them. I really appreciate living here on this land with the Snuneymuxw First Nation. I don't know how many of you know me. I grew up in this area. My grandfather had a farm out off Jinglepot Road, and my dad grew up there, and then I went to school in Ladysmith, and we used to come to Gabriola quite often. We had family friends here, Carla and Teddy. Teddy was a potter. He's not with us anymore, and Carla's moved somewhere else. But their son Thor was named because I was really into Thor, the god of thunder at the time. And we would come over here to visit, and I always loved coming to Gabriola and coming to see the galleries and playing on the beaches. I moved to Ottawa when I was 16 years old after campaigning with Tommy Douglas. Actually, on my 16th birthday, I spent with Tommy Douglas door knocking and to get my dad elected. He was a member of Parliament for Cowichan and Malahati Islands, basically everything from Ladysmith south, except for Victoria. And yes, he was a United Church minister in Ladysmith, and so I went and finished high school in Ottawa, and I went to Humber College for the jazz program, and I played professionally for about 10 years, but I was really inspired by the work my mother did. She was a filmmaker. She did a lot of social justice documentaries, and I realized rock and roll wasn't going to change the world the way I wanted it to. So I went to broadcasting school, and during that time, I became a dad. I became a dad through adoption. So I adopted a three-year-old girl, and that really changed. I grew up in an activist family. My parents were activists, and I remember going to rallies for free Leonard Peltier when I was about 7 years old. I would leaflet for the NDP when I was a kid. I got chased off my first porch when I was 9 years old, dropping leaflets. So, I was part of a group called Youth Action for Peace that shut down Armex in Ottawa when I was like 18 years old. We crashed through the gates because it was a big arms fair where they were selling weapons to all of these dictators around the planet, and we just thought that was appalling.
You're always against jobs.
I'm always against jobs. I know. I was against the selling of armored personnel equipment to Saudi Arabia. I know I'm against jobs. It's like terrible. So I was a young activist. I was environmentally aware, but when I became a father, suddenly the future became really personal to me. And in 1991, during those years, actually, I was a canvasser. So I was playing professionally, but I really wanted to learn more about environmental issues. And I was a canvasser for Friends of the Earth when Elizabeth May was the executive director, and Pollution Probe and Greenpeace. And then in 1991, I read David Suzuki's book, A Matter of Survival. And then I really sort of internalized what was going on with climate change. And then, I just had to double down for my daughter. She wasn't my flesh and blood, but she was looking up to me and calling me dad. And I knew that I had to just do my best for this kid. And so I did, and I made a pledge to myself when I graduated from broadcasting, that I wasn't going to make any films that I didn't want to watch myself, that I wouldn't want my kids to watch, or I wouldn't want to explain to my grandchildren that that's how I wasted my time while we were dealing with, the threat of war, famine, environmental degradation, and climate change. So that's what I did, and I've lived that truth. I moved back out to Victoria, and one of the first things I did was trespass into the Victoria watershed with Vicky Husband and Mehdi Najari. When they were logging in the watershed, the water district owned the land, but they were logging it out, and there was boil water advisories all the time. And people were saying it's because of the logging, and the water district was going, no, it has nothing to do with that. So we hiked in there with this big honking camera and a huge porta-pack, which is what we used back in those days. And every time we heard a truck, we had to hit the ditch and hide. But when we got there, they had logged out right around the creeks, and they had to rebuild the creeks with rocks. And you could just see the sediment flowing into the lake. And then we flew over the next day with the same big honking camera, trying to point it out of a Cessna. And I gave that footage. I had a show on Rogers, because I graduated from broadcasting the same year that CBC laid off half their employees and shut down half their plants. So when I went into broadcasting, 95% of the grads were getting jobs in the field. When I graduated, it was 5%. But I was determined, so I had a show on Rogers, and I did an expose on logging in the watershed, and I gave all my footage to the CTV, Czech, CBC, and Global, and within 10 days there was a moratorium on logging in that watershed. That was my first victory as a videographer. And I went back into the watershed in 2008 to make educational videos about the value of an intact forest, and how it, when you have a mixed forest, the rain comes down and it filters through and it hits the ground nice and gently, and then it sifts through the soil, and it's retained by the roots of the big trees, and then it gets into the wetland, and it's filtered and purified, and it works really well, and you don't have to pay for all of this filtration and chlorination and everything else that you need to do in a watershed that's been destroyed. And so the water manager is explaining all this lovely stuff, and I said, the last time I was in here, I was trespassing to do an expose on logging, and he said, "You're that guy." Thank you very much. Because they knew, and people in the water district knew, that it was the right thing to do, that a natural ecosystem provides those services. But then they were up against this, we need to make money, and the best way to make money is to chop down these trees. And so they haven't logged there since, and they're way ahead of the rest of the east coast of Vancouver Island, where 20% of Vancouver Island is private land because of the ENN land grant from going back to Confederation, including Gabriola. 20 kilometers or 20 miles on either side of the ENN was given to the coal baron Robert Dunsmuir, and because of that, every one of the communities from Campbell River south, their community drinking water is in private forest land. And in our drinking watershed in Nanaimo, I did an expose in 2004 because they were using aerial spray to dump fertilizer in the watershed. And they showed me the footage, and they said, they wouldn't give me the footage, but they showed me the footage and said, look, we're dropping the fertilizer, and there's a creek here, we stop spraying, and then we pick it up again. I'm like, but what, like it rains and everything flows into the creek and into the lake. But that expose that I did stopped fertilizer spraying in our watershed. I started making films with my parents. In 1996, we released a film based on a letter my dad found in 1993. My parents have been human rights activists all their lives, and they've stood in solidarity with First Nations people in this country. And because my dad was a United Church minister, the Willie Blackwater case in Port Alberni. Wow, that's really kicked down the noise level in here. Thank you. Because my father was a United Church minister, my parents sat with Willie Blackwater through that whole case where he was coming forward with the complaints about Robert Plinth, who's sexually assaulted all of these children. And my father found in the archive an 18-page scathing letter written in 1898 about the abuses that were happening in the Port Simpson home. And then he found all the letters that were written to shut down the woman, Elizabeth Shaw, who wrote that letter. And she eventually died in a mental institution in Brockville because she really lost her faith. She lost her faith in humanity because of the abuse that she witnessed in 1898. And so that film was broadcast across Canada and broadcast by all the provincial broadcasters. It's part of the curriculum in British Columbia now to teach young people about the history of the residential school system. And then I went to Guatemala with my parents. My parents have done a lot of human rights accompaniment, and so has my younger brother. My younger brother volunteered as a human rights accompanier, bringing back Mayan refugees from Chiapas to Guatemala with my mother after the Civil War ended. And now my brother's worked his way through the UN system, and he is the head of the UNHCR, the High Commission on Refugees in Mexico City, and dealing with all the refugees flooding in through Central and South America through Mexico. But my parents did human rights accompaniment down in Guatemala, and I went down and did film work with them, and I also did human rights accompaniment myself in Chiapas and in Guatemala with labor activists who were receiving death threats while they were trying to unionize or just organize workers. At that time, I was 4 years into, I bought the first digital editing system, one of the first ones in Vancouver in 1994. It was a $250,000 system, and I trained a whole bunch of people how to use it, and I knew how to use this kind of gear, trained advertising agencies and Rogers and lots of people. And a friend of mine phoned me up and said, "Hey, Paul, I got this great gig in San Francisco. You got to come down. I'm working for these ad agencies. We're in this huge studio. I'm editing, and there's this massive screen, and they come in here in the limousines, and they got the food and the fruit platters and the cognac and trays of cocaine, and I'm making like 120 grand a year US, and you got to come and do this. We're making like commercials for Budweiser and Nike, and they're going to be on the Super Bowl." And I was like, "Sorry, dude, I am not working for those companies, and I am on my way to Guatemala to help organize labor down there to try to deal with the abuses of workers who are making that stuff for us North Americans." So that's, some of the film work that I did earlier on. Later on, I made a film about Sombrio Beach, you might know about the squatter community and the surfers that were down there. I did a film called You, Me, and the SPP, which is about the Security and Prosperity Partnership. Do you know about the SPP? Anybody? Oh, yeah, so that was after 9/11, Fortress North America. All the corporations were trying to get what they couldn't get in NAFTA, snuck through as part of this deep integration where they were integrating the military, the security, intelligence infrastructure, policing, everything else, like a system where the FBI and the CIA and DEA can now operate in Canada, and the RCMP can operate in the United States, and the militaries can cross borders when we need them to. So part of that process was to harmonize regulations between all three countries. And it was dumbing down those regulations rather than the European model where everybody brings their regulations up to a higher standard. In the SPP system, they were all going to a lower standard. And Stephen Harper said, this is just about making the color of jelly beans the same, and it's not a big deal, and don't worry about it. And it was a conspiracy theory. First, it was a conspiracy theory, the whole SPP thing, but it was on the US government website, very clear and plain to see and explained. So when I was working on that film, I was at Montebello, Quebec, and I was following around Maud Barlow and doing doing this kind of, I was at a protest and Stephen Harper, Felipe Calderon, and George Bush Jr. were all meeting to talk about the SPP. And Maud was on the phone and I was waiting around for her and I heard this guy yelling. And it was Dave Coles, union leader for the Communication, Energy and Paper Workers Union. And there was these three big burly guys with masks on. And a bunch of young, skinny vegan activists were saying, these guys are cops, they're trying to get us to throw rocks with them. And they attacked the riot squad, and I got footage of them banging rocks into the shields and then, pushing in the face mask and stuff like that. And they were taken down, really nice and soft. My sister's a police officer, by the way. She's Ontario Provincial Police, and she looked at it and she went, that's a mighty soft takedown. And then, lo and behold, all their boots matched. Right, so you could see the police officers taking them down, and the radicals were wearing their duty boots. Union rules, right? So that went viral, and that actually kicked up a lot of interest in the SPP. That footage, people were writing me checks like, "You got to make this film." So I was putting it out in pieces, and 6 months after I released my film, the SPP was officially terminated and broken out into like smaller parts. So that footage, by the way, Dave Coles pulls off one mask of a police officer, and I, holding on to $7,000 worth of camera gear, pull off the mask of another guy, kind of freaking out that I'm going to have my camera trashed because I'm not insured for riots, right? I didn't have that kind of, my insurance agent saw that on television and phoned me up right away and said, you need to talk to somebody else, like another company, if you're going to be doing that kind of work. And, riot insurance for videographers is pretty expensive. So, yeah, that was the SPP film. I've done films about watersheds. I did a film about the Nanaimo River and the history of the Nanaimo River and all the different uses of that, and including the spray stuff and that was done in 2011 and 2012 or 2013. I did a film called Troubled Water, which is all about Vancouver Island watersheds and the issues that they're dealing with. I'm working on a film right now about 5 acres, the history of the Harewood area, and that includes interviews with Nanaimo because that's their territory and that's how I operate. If I'm talking about history in an area, then I want to include the voices of the Indigenous people. And in Troubled Water, I do cover water issues in some of the reserves and some of the nations. And then I'm making a film about investor-state dispute settlements, and that's all about what happens in NAFTA. That's part of the SPP film that I did, and back then, investor-state is a process where foreign corporations, not Canadian corporations, get extraordinary rights to sue governments for laws and policies that get in the way of their profitability. And so this is a tool that's used all over the world. Canadian mining companies use it as a big stick to have their way with other countries when they're doing environmental assessments and they don't like where things are going. And so that's a film I'm working on right now. I could really get into the weeds on investor state. I'm actually the international trade and investment critic for the Green Party, so I've read the TPP, read the TPP, the CPTPP. NAFTA I have the copy of. I looked at the USMCA and CETA agreements and then talked to experts and provide advice to the rest of the shadow cabinet. And so I did a lot of television too. I did the first preschool show on APTN. I did a ton of educational television. I co-produced that pilot and did 64 episodes. And when everything went reality TV, I quit because the shows I was stuck doing were like Singles and Manhattan Matchmaker, where everybody was getting set up for failure, and then you zoom in on the tears as they freak out. And people sign their lives away and then get torn apart in these productions, and I just hated it. Couldn't do it. Did a few of those and talked to the producer, and I said, do you have anything else? And he goes, well, why? You don't like this? And I said, I wouldn't want to spend half an hour watching this, let alone 40 hours editing it. Like, seriously, this is garbage. And that was the last conversation I had with that production company. They didn't have anything else for me to do. So I moved on, and then I worked in artist management, and I toured bands all over the world. And at the same time that everything went reality TV, the main band I had broke up, and so I'd signed them on, did record deals and stuff like that for them. So I've worked with, Atlantic Records and Ryko and done big deals like that, business deals. And so I had a little bit of a midlife crisis, and I couldn't afford a sports car, so I went back to school and I got a degree in global studies and media studies, because what I really wanted to do was to learn more about policy making. You see, one thing to stand outside and say, you know, you need to change what you're doing, and it's another to step into that ring and start writing policy and working on those things. So I got those degrees, and in 2014, I decided I was going to step up and follow in my dad's footsteps. I'd followed in my mom's footsteps and done the filmmaking thing, and I was going to run for the NDP. But I wasn't allowed to. And I wasn't allowed to because of something I did to defend my father. My father, I've said my parents have been human rights activists all their lives, worked with First Nations in this country, worked with Indigenous people in Central America. They turned their eyes to Israel and Palestine. And my dad was on a boat to Gaza in 2012 with members of parliament from all over Europe on a 45-meter sailboat when he was seized illegally in international waters off of Egypt and hauled away and thrown into an Israeli detention center. And it wasn't about anti-Semitism, it was about human rights for the Palestinians, and it was about the illegal blockade of Gaza. And I was the only family member at home, so the media came to me, and I did interviews with CTV and CBC and Global. Actually, I found out that my father was in detention because Global phoned me up to ask me how I felt, and I was like, what? We knew that it was likely to happen. My dad had several bypasses on his heart in his life, and we were very concerned about it, so I wrote letters to the Israeli embassy and to the Harper government and to everybody I could and said, you do not want a martyr. Make sure that my father is treated properly. And he almost turned 80 in that detention center, and we didn't hear from him for 5 days. And I called up my member of parliament, Gene Crowder, who I campaigned for and who my father campaigned for, and I said, Gene, are you going to, speak up for my dad? This is your job. Your job as my MP and my father's MP is to stand up when there's an international incident like this. She was like, I know it's bad. It's bad, but I can't talk about this. You got to talk to Paul Dewar. That's his job. I was like, okay. So I tried to get in touch with Paul Dewar, and he was tweeting about being at this party and that party and this event and having a great old time. And I was tweeting at him. I was like, Paul, can you get back to me about my father? I haven't heard from him. I don't know whether, I heard that people were tasered on that boat. I heard that they were cuffed and left in the sun to dehydrate. I want to know if my dad's okay. He's almost 80 years old. And nothing, crickets. And so I wrote a letter to the NDP caucus, and I said, what is wrong with you people? This is an elder statesman from your party. He was at the founding convention of the NDP. He was a CCF member. Tommy Douglas, who I campaigned with as a kid, would have stood up for my dad. Even though it might not be the popular thing to do to talk about Israel and Palestine, he would have stood up for my father. Where are you? And that letter was leaked to the media, and Peter O'Neill phoned me up the next day and said, did you write this? And I said, if you're reading it, do you stand by these words? I said, I wrote them. So yeah, are you upset? Yes, I am. I still haven't heard from my dad. Elizabeth May stood up and publicly said that my father should be released, but nobody from the NDP did. So 2 years later, when I stepped up for the nomination for the NDP, I wasn't allowed to run. I wasn't allowed to run because I did what any son would do when their father's doing the right thing. I stood up for my dad. And, Israel and Palestine is not on my regular agenda of something I talk about. I talk about a lot of environmental issues. I talk about a lot of indigenous issues, of things that are pertinent to this area and to our community. I work with people with disabilities, and I talk about the affordability crisis because I work with people who are really suffering under this affordability crisis right now. People who are struggling, they're trying to find work, they've got barriers to employment, and I try to get them out and working. I've worked with 60 young people in the last 3 years, and 6 of them experienced homelessness while they were in my program. So, those are the kind of issues I focus on. I've been working with seniors at Nanaimo Food Share doing video production, teaching seniors video skills, and they go out and make videos about seniors and food, and they're dealing with the same kind of issues that the young people are. Affordability, the price of a place to live, the price of food, isolation, not being connected to the community. So, 2014, I wasn't allowed to run. I wrote a letter to my supporters saying, this is the story, sorry. I sent it out on a Friday at 4 o'clock on a Canada Day long weekend, and I came back Tuesday morning and it was a front page news story. And Elizabeth May called me. And she asked me, she was very gentle about it. Would you like a new political home? And I met Elizabeth May actually 30 years ago on Earth Day. I was fronting the headline act at an Earth Day festival in Ottawa at the conference center for about 1,000 people, and Elizabeth was one of the keynote speakers. And I was singing a song about McDonald's called Rotten Ronnie. And so we go back and we would run into each other. I was on the national board of the Council of Canadians, so sometimes we would see each other at different events. And of course, she stood up and spoke for my father. But I said no. And I said no, I think about 3 or 4 more times, I'm not sure. But it's hard, it's hard to change where where you've been and what you've grown up with, right? It's hard. But, then she gave me this, Vision Green. And this is the policy book. And it's on the Green Party website. Vision Green, it's a top tab. We're the only party that makes our policy book very available, right? The other parties in 2015, all their policy books disappeared. You couldn't find them anywhere. And so you want to know what I stand for, you can check this out. It's hyperlinked. It's got everything about except the square foot cage size for chickens, I think.
I think that's in there.
Is it? Elizabeth thinks it's in there. Anyway, it's hyperlinked, so you can search for party policy anywhere in there. And I read through the whole thing, and then one of the questions is, do you, when you're stepping up to run, do you support the policy? And you need to declare any policies that you don't support. And I read through and I went, I certainly do support this. And so it's an amazing policy book. It's about the future. It's about well, not just the 4-year cycle. It's about where do we want to be in 10 years, in 15, in 20, in 30 years. And the thing is, I now have 2 daughters. My youngest daughter is about to turn 19. But after the last federal election, my oldest daughter phoned me up and said, Dad, I'm pregnant. So now I'm a grandfather. And the future is personal again. It's personal again, and we're not dealing with the climate crisis the way we need to. We have parties that talk about it. They talk about climate change, and then they promote and approve fracking and LNG exports with huge giveaways, tax write-offs, $6 billion for 5 multinational corporations. 3 of them are state-owned. And they are talking about climate change, and then they're approving these kind of pipelines and projects. The Site C Dam, the Minister of the Environment, the federal Minister of the Environment was on Facebook telling us that we all need to change our light bulbs, and here you can go to Canadian Tire and get new light bulbs and shower heads. I did that decades ago. I've done that decades ago. I've done 2 home energy retrofits. I rent out a home that is an Energy Star. It was built in 1910. It is fully insulated. It's got heat pumps. The tenants love it because their utility bills are super low. I did that to a cabin as well that, I got no grants to do the cabin, but I got a senior in there who lives on disability, and I don't raise the rent on him because I understand the crisis that he faces on a daily basis with how he needs to get through, but he lives in an energy efficient home, and he can live there without worrying about hydro rates continuing to go up on him. I don't need a lesson about changing light bulbs. I need the government to stop promoting fracking and raw bitumen exports and buying pipelines. Enough of this nonsense. People ask me about the pipeline, like, oh, you don't support the pipeline. Absolutely not. I'm on the board for Mid-Island Co-op. I've been on that board for 11 years. Watched it grow from a $50 million operation to 189 or so, I think it's hitting this year, $188 million. And we're in the gas business. You know it because we got a gas station here on Gabriola. And we keep the prices similar. I think you guys pay an extra penny more than what we pay over in Nanaimo. We do that intentionally. We do that at Salt Spring as well. Salt Spring was getting gouged. They were paying 20 cents more than what they were paying in Crofton. When we came over to Salt Spring, those other gas stations were boycotted so badly they shut down. But we are one of 150 co-ops that owns Federated Co-ops. And Federated Co-ops owns the 7th largest refinery in Canada. And they put $3 billion into that refinery. You know why? Because there's Canadian customers. There's Canadian customers. In Vancouver Island, we can't get that gas here. We import our gasoline on Vancouver Island and in the Lower Mainland. It's coming from the United States. And so does it make sense to be exporting raw bitumen so that we can import refined product? No. It does not. It does make zero sense. And these people that, don't get me wrong, I'm not in favor of spending any more money on any more fossil fuels infrastructure. But these people that go on about jobs, 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 if they wanted jobs for people in the oil sector, what do you think they would do?
Build refineries.
They would build an upgrader in Alberta. They would send synthetic crude to the Chevron station at Burrard Inlet, and they would refine that material for us here. Instead, they can't run that refinery at full capacity, and they cannot deal with raw bitumen. They would send that synthetic crude to Sarnia, where there's refineries that cannot handle raw bitumen, but can handle synthetic crude. And they would send it to Quebec. Instead, they were proposing Energy East, which was about driving a pipeline all the way to St. John's, New Brunswick. Do you know why they picked St. John's, New Brunswick? Not so they could refine it and send it back, so they could get it to Tidewater and get it out of the country. That makes no sense at all. And they're just BSing us. Jobs, jobs, jobs. That's nonsense. It's money, 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 money. You know, they say it's going to be better for the economy, but Alberta makes more money off of alcohol, tobacco, and gaming than they do off of oil and gas revenue.
Yes. All right.
That is just crazy. So they talk about we need this for social programs. You want to trash the environment to pay for social programs? We want to frack our environment? Like there was just a health report about what's going on with fracking and how, we know it poisons the water. We know it's poisoning the air. It's making people sick up there. But it's trashing our environment. We need our environment to live in to stay healthy. And to trash the environment to pay for social programs is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It just doesn't make sense. It just makes me angry. It really makes me angry. So I'm fed up with this stuff. I'm fed up with this, and that's why I am running again. We are the only party that's saying enough. No more fracking. No more fossil fuel infrastructure in this country. Let's deal with what we have. People need to transition. We need a just transition. We need to make sure that we're not just cutting everybody off, but that we're gonna go through a just transition, and we're gonna make sure that people can do this. Right? Or put solar panels, put solar panels on the food share roof so that people can see how much solar you can produce in Nanaimo. And it's an energy efficient building. We just got a heat pump there. We're like getting off that frack pipe. That's what we need to do. Anyway, I've rambled on probably way too long. I'm sorry. Because I want to leave time for questions. But I do want to invite somebody up to introduce Elizabeth. And this is somebody that I was singing along to his songs when I was a kid. Deep is the chief. Show us the length. As an 11-year-old, I knew the words to that and was trucking around singing them. I don't know what my parents thought, but they played that record. So with no further ado, I would like to invite Bob Boston up today.
I'm 73. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but I checked last night. I voted in 27 federal and provincial elections since the first one in 1968. All 27 times I voted for the NDP, but not this time. There's two reasons I'm changing my vote. One's political and one's personal. I'll just very briefly want to tell you about them. The political one, I mean, I'm not particularly mad about the NDP or anything. I mean, if you're NDP long enough, you learn to live with a lot of disappointment. It's just sort of comes with the territory. And there's been good stuff, great stuff. I thought Sheila was a great MP. Nathan Cullen, I think, is terrific. In fact, I think Chief Bob Chamberlain it would be wonderful to have that booming voice in the House of Commons. But this time, that's not enough. There's something more important at stake. I believe, as clearly many of you do, and Paul does, I know Elizabeth does, that what we're experiencing is not just the early stages of global warming or climate change, it's the early stage of a full-on climate crisis. Davy, my son, and G, my daughter, I mean, the decades they're going to live through are going to be worse, are going to be harder. That's a given. That's just the truth. If we don't get active and don't turn things around quickly, my grandkids, Riley and Arlo, I hate to think of what that's going to be like if we continue to keep our head in the sand and play lip service to change. So I don't think we can any longer afford to have thrown a carbon tax but keep expanding the oil sands at the same time, or subsidize electric cars while filling the Northeast with fracking. Not if we care about our kids. And I've forgotten who said it, but someone said at this point the choice is between a crash and a crash landing. But what can we do here on Gabriola is always the question I feel. What can I do with my limited amount of political clout? But I think that Justin Trudeau has given us an absolutely unique opportunity with this crazy by-election. This time we are not one riding among several hundred that are all voting. We're the only one. If anyone is watching, and I think they will be, they're watching us. And so I think we have a chance here on Gabriola and little Nanaimo Cowichan to send a really strong message. I think we can use this election to demand that the parties really take global warming seriously, really take the climate crisis seriously, as the Greens have done. And if we vote Green, if we vote for Paul, if we get our friends and neighbors to consider it, I think we can do that. I think we can be heard across the country. We'll be heard by the Liberals in Ottawa, and we'll certainly be heard by the NDP in Victoria, and they need to hear that message. Of all those 27 votes that I've done, I don't think any one of them has been as potentially influential as this one. So that's my political reason. My personal reason is I love Elizabeth May. She has worked so long and so hard with such decency and integrity and humor and all of those things. Now, some of you will know that in a couple of weeks Elizabeth is getting married, and I thought, what better wedding present than getting her a seatmate in Ottawa. So, welcome, Elizabeth May.
Well, I love Bob too, but I'm marrying John. And it is extraordinary, and I'm very grateful. Your introduction reminded me so much of the letter I got years ago from Farley Mowat, saying, I think he said at the age of 86, I've seen the light. So muster me up if I pass muster. And it was hard for him to leave the NDP to join the Greens. What I want to say to anyone in this by-election is you don't have to make a life choice forever. You know, give Paul 5 months, and if he's no good, you get your money back. You vote in October. You know, it's a 100% vote back guarantee. Give Paul Manley a chance. Just watch him. He slices, he dices, he chops. But wait, there's more. No, I feel like it's the most extraordinary thing. The minute Paul becomes your member of parliament on May 6th, he starts running for re-election. So you know he's going to work hard. But he's going to work hard no matter what, because Greens, we work hard. The Greens who are elected across Canada, there are now 10 of us. And very soon, speaking of wedding presents, I'm getting married on Earth Day, which is also, Paul, and my 30th anniversary, as it turns out. No, more than 30 years.
30 years.
Oh, yes, 3 years, 1989, okay. So it's more than that because I'll get married on Earth Day. But the next day, April 23rd, the voters in Prince Edward Island go to the polls. And they'll be voting on 2 things. One is to get rid of first past the post on Prince Edward Island. Yeah. And the other is what government do they want? And it's extraordinary, you probably have heard this, the Green Party of Prince Edward Island is currently running ahead of the Liberals and the Conservatives. Yeah. So, my dear friend Peter Bevan Baker, who is the leader of the Green Party of Prince Edward Island, by the way, Greens do well. They always say to us, what, you're trying to steal somebody's vote. And I always think that's very offensive. Number one, political parties don't own votes, and we're not trying to steal anything. We want people who've been staying home out of disgust to get out and vote. Because you know in 2011, when Stephen Harper got a so-called majority government, if the government had been based on where the electorate went on election day, the majority government would have been called the We Stayed Home Party. Because there were more people who didn't vote than who voted Conservative. Now in Peter Bevan Baker's case, because I've always said, you know, we do well at the polls when we have high voter turnout. That's when Greens get elected. So when I was elected in 2011, May 2nd, 2011 was when I was elected on Saanich Gulf Islands. We had the highest voter turnout in Saanich Gulf Islands of any riding in Canada, except PEI, because they tend to. So I had 75%, the voters of Saanich Gulf Islands turned out at the level of 75% voter turnout. And that was higher than any other place, except PEI. And when I was re-elected, we had 80% voter turnout. But my buddy, Peter Bevan Baker, which is what made me think of this, Peter Bevan Baker, when he finally won a seat in Prince Edward Island, his riding had 92% voter turnout. So it's quite fun to offer people something that they may not have experienced in their lifetime, which is feeling really proud of your member of parliament, really proud of your MLA, or in this case, just feeling really good when you go to vote. Because you haven't just held your nose to vote strategically. You actually vote for what you want, and that gets people, not in every riding across Canada, but that is my goal, seeing our voter turnout rise up to like 90% voter turnout because citizens are really engaged in their democracy and recognize what we need. Because if we want to react to the climate crisis, we don't need to change our light bulbs. We need to change our government. And that's what will make a difference for us. So I want to make sure we have time to hear all the questions that you have. But back to the things that will make a big difference in Canada. This by-election gives us a chance to say clearly Andrew Scheer won't hear it no matter how clearly we say it. He's unfit to govern. He has no understanding of climate science and he rejects it. Fortunately for the country, the vote on the right, as here in Nanaimo Ladysmith in this by-election, you're experiencing for the first time in a long time that the vote on the right is split. There's the People's Party. And Maxime Bernier and the People's Party will be running candidates in every riding across Canada. And I will say this for Max, because he sits next to me in Parliament. You can see why I want Paul so very, very much. Right now, my seatmate is Maxime Bernier. And I try to explain climate science to him because, I really never want to give up on anyone. But Max said, Elizabeth, you must tell everybody across Canada that I am better than Andrew Scheer. Because I will say, if elected, we do nothing on climate. He'll do nothing, but he won't say it. So tell people I am more honest. So now I've done what Max wants. I've told you he's more honest. Disastrous, but honest. Andrew Scheer. Then we get to what it means to be able to vote for what you want in this country. And I am appalled because I can't get over how the Liberal promised that we were going to be climate leaders. I'm sure you all know this. They haven't changed the target. It's the same target that Stephen Harper put in place in May 2015. It's not consistent with avoiding 1.5 degree, of holding global average temperature to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's the goal in the Paris Agreement. And we still have a target that if we hit it, would mean 5.1 degrees Celsius, not 1.5. And even with this very weak Harper climate target, the current government federally does not have a plan to reach the weak Harper target. And what we have to do is start setting our sights not on what's politically convenient, but what's necessary. And what's necessary is to plan for the end of fossil fuel dependency in Canada and around the world as quickly as possible so that we can maintain a hospitable climate on a planet that sustains life. And we are at that much of a risk that if we don't act in the next couple of years, we don't have 12 years. When the IPCC report came out, I think it's better to measure it in months. The IPCC report came out October 8th, 2018, saying that we have to cut emissions by 45% and do it by 2030 and 100% by 2050. It's not about reducing your carbon footprint. It's a plan to go off fossil fuels 100%, and we need, if we don't start soon, it will be too late by the 2023 election. So you here in Nanaimo Ladysmith have the most powerful vote you've ever had in your life. Exactly as Bob said, you have a chance to elect Paul Manley and send a signal right across the country that will be heard right across the country. A shot across the bow of every other party before the federal election of October 2019 that there is no later. There is only now. And we are committed to taking the actions that are necessary. Thank you. Oh, thank you. So let's help. Thank you. Thank you. No, Rochelle can do
it. My name is Rochelle Coy, Wait Goitep, Rochelle Coy in Squest. I am the Green Party candidate for Victoria. And I am so happy to be with you today. I'm so happy to learn more about Paul. It's always a pleasure to hear from Elizabeth. It's also great to see the reaction that you're having with them. We want to get your questions. So we have 2 microphones here, but just before we do that, I just want to say a little something. You heard me speak in my language, or one of my 2 languages, which is, well, 4. Okay, I speak 4 languages. I speak the official language of Canada. Je parle aussi français. Je fais des nouvelles aussi de temps en temps pour Radio-Canada. I speak French. I went to a French-speaking university because I'm stubborn. I have no French ancestry. I'm just stubborn. And I wanted to go to a university for a program. I have Statlium and Secwepemc ancestry. I'm a member of one of the Statlium communities of Shemakwam. And I am very close ties. And unfortunately, when they give us this little card that makes me official Indian, as I am an Indian in the Indian Act, I have to choose. I have to choose where I belong. Well, the reality is we're many things in life. And the reality is I see so many of those common values and that community building, that commitment to people and planet and making a difference and being a great conscience for all of Canada of what matters for around the world through these 2 amazing people. And I stand with them with pride because I know irregardless of the topic, be it social justice, climate breakdown, or Indigenous rights and title, we have 2 amazing people who can make a difference in Ottawa, and it's up to you to decide. So with that, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be with you today. We have microphones open and we invite you to address questions to either Elizabeth or Paul. This is your chance to ask questions of your proposed next Member of Parliament for Nanaimo Ladysmith. So don't be shy. I've never met anybody, whether you're Green or NDP, I've never met anybody who's shy. But we do just ask you to use the microphones only because it just helps everybody hear. Also, we are recording, so some of these questions can be shared to a broader audience. So again, we welcome you to go to the microphones at this time. Hello, welcome.
So the last time that Elizabeth was here was Earth Day. She gave her speech here, and I caught her just before she got in the car and asked her if she realized that the reason nobody can get off of fossil fuels is that you can't fight a war with them.
Yeah.
And until the Green Party comes to terms with the fact that you have to be an anti-war party, not just a pro-environment. Well, I mean, really emphasize the connection that oil and war are.
Yeah.
That, okay, that's all I wanted to make the point.
Thank you.
Can I speak to it?
Of course.
Just, I'm happy to speak to the Green Party globally, and we are the only global party. And the only thing that holds us together is 6 core green values. Because, I mean, I have the same relationship in terms of structure or institution with Andrew Weaver, leader of the Green Party of British Columbia, as I do with my friend James Shaw, who's the Minister of Climate in the New Zealand government and co-leader of New Zealand Greens, or with Isabella Lövin, who is the Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden and co-leader of Swedish Greens. So we're all around the world. The only thing that holds us together is the commitment to 6 core green values. And one of them is the commitment to nonviolence and peace. So you might wonder, well, you might not wonder, it shocked me at the time that I was the only member of parliament in June 2011 to vote against bombing Libya. I had a lot of NDP friends there who were also members of parliament who came up to me afterwards with tear-stained faces because they had to vote to bomb Libya because the vote was whipped. I don't think we've mentioned yet, we don't whip votes. Paul will never have to vote the way I suggest, and I won't be able to demand. I will only suggest. But you won't find any other party telling you right now Canada does not need any new fighter jets. It's not a question of which jet we buy. We don't need fighter jets. We do need a military because there's a very large security threat out there, and it's called the climate crisis. And we have to convert our military to be ready to help wherever help is needed, whether it's sandbagging rivers, rescuing people from forest fires, working around the world, and we are needed for peacekeeping.
So thank you. I see a couple of people coming forward. You're closest. We'll go with you, and then we'll go with you. Go ahead. So we're just going to go over here first.
My name's Patrick Canning. I live on the island. Elizabeth, we've known each other a long time, and we'll chat in person sooner or later. I have 2 quick questions. One is, and I forget the term that had been used. A couple months ago, there was some discussion about kind of a climate cabinet. And I just wonder where that stands and what we as members in the public can do.
Yeah.
And the other question is a bit more detailed, and it's about, you've talked about the importance of getting a lot of people out. And I think the reason the Green Party does that, like you said, a connection between high turnout and Green Party members being elected, is because, they have a platform which actually inspires people. And regarding the climate, one of the weaknesses, I think, in the whole system is oil and gas subsidies. We've recently had a report on that. And it seems to me that a focused attack, for lack of a better word, on oil and gas subsidies from the Green Party could be something which A, is useful, and B, would inspire people to see that the party is really taking action and get out and vote and support them.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Thanks, Patrick. The idea of, forgive me for stepping back to a digression, but it helps contextualize where this idea came from. Actually, it was a conversation I was having with David Suzuki. We'd just gotten off we'd just gotten off the Sky Train. We were about to walk up Burnaby Mountain, and he was having one of his moments of profound angst of giving up on how do we save ourselves. And I was drawing on everything I had to convince him we still have hope, which is one of the things I do believe. We have hope. We have to get through this. We have to have hope. What do we grab onto in terms of it helps when you're facing things that are deeply terrifying, like extinction, and a commitment to extinction, a path to extinction, and knowing that most governments around the world are committed to that path, and how do we get off that? Where in the course of our human history can we draw on an experience that's analogous? And I ended up finding myself saying to David, look, what did Churchill do in May 1940? Because we were having this conversation about, well, look at the evidence. What do we do? If you look at the evidence, where do you see the hope? Saying, okay, so forgive me, I started thinking about, well, no, look, and I've been deeply reading this to be able to figure out, is this an analogous human experience that helps us get our way through the climate crisis? Obviously, fascism in Germany isn't like the climate crisis. But human beings are human beings, and human nature hasn't changed all that much. And I was reading about how the British government in that period of spring 1940 they didn't do public opinion polling, but they did a daily morale report to the cabinet. And the morale report was telling the British government that the British populace, particularly the elites, were becoming very fatalistic. They decided that they were basically going to be under German rule and have to hope for the best. The working people were lining up to sign up for the Home Guard. Meanwhile, the entire British Army, I didn't realize this for a long time. I grew up, my dad's British and was in the Blitz and everything, and I always knew the stories of Dunkirk. But I never realized it was the entire British Army that was trapped on that beach, and that you couldn't get the Navy close enough to the beach to rescue the men because the water was too shallow. The Luftwaffe had them pinned down, and there were no defenses built around the island of Great Britain because Neville Chamberlain was quite sure the Nazis would be reasonable. So there was, all the news was bad. And they were trying to convince Churchill to go, as some of you may have known because this was also in a film recently, send emissaries to Mussolini. Mussolini would be a broker. We could, I loved the report, the detail of the daily morale report. Women in particular have stopped listening to the wireless. Nobody wanted to know, and I think that's a lot what's going on with climate crisis. It's deep. Everybody knows it must be really, really bad. It's terrifying, and yet there's no leadership. Now, the question for me was, how on earth did Churchill think it up? I can't find any. I've been reading in the history. I haven't found any evidence yet for who suggested to Churchill, or did he think it up himself, how many civilian boats are in Dover? That wasn't part of the military set of assets. And I think it's the same thing in the climate crisis. What are our equivalents now? There were, by the way, 861 civilian boats in Dover. Fishing boats, ferries, recreational. And you'd think, okay, well, don't talk crazy here. There's 220,000 men stranded on the beach. Do you think 861 boats run by amateurs with no military experience? Do you think 861 civilian boats in Dover? Sorry, I still can't believe it. Historically, they did it. They rescued 220,000 soldiers off the beach. They did it under the shadow of the Luftwaffe because they got cloud cover. They got really lucky that one day. And then they decided, well, we're not surrendering. Now, what Churchill then did, which is what got me to this idea, was, well, they'd already done it. When there's an existential threat to your country, partisan politics are really in the way. So they formed a war cabinet, which meant the inner cabinet of the UK government involved all the opposition people that you really didn't want that hated Churchill and he hated them. The war cabinet was the inner cabinet, and all the rest of government went on as usual in the outer cabinet. And of course, Mackenzie King in Canada did the same thing. So I think we need a survival cabinet. Bring everybody into the same room so that the decisions we make now are not prone to a partisan debate at the next election. They would say, yeah, we had to do that. That's why we made the decision we're going off fossil fuels. That's why I made the decision invest now in an east-west electricity grid so that we can take all the fossil fuels out of electricity as fast as possible. Then we can move to electric vehicles and ban the internal combustion engine. We can make biodiesel out of used chip fat from every McDonald's. Speaking of Rotten Ronnie, they have now produced our best fuel source for short-term use for tractors and fishing boats and forestry. And we also have to insulate all our buildings, and it's a massive job production. It's a huge operation, and it's going to take, I think, a lot of spirit of what we had. My parents used to tell me about my mom's victory gardens, and we can say, okay, how many people are ready to, I'd love to ask Canadians, tell us your local Rotary Club, how many trees do they want to plant? Tell us if you belong to a local union. Do you want to take over putting up solar panels on every university, school, and hospital across Canada? How many people want to sign up? Sign me up, I want to plant a garden. Sign me up, I want to learn how to install insulation. Sign me up. Now, to do that, it's best if we kick partisanship out. So your question, Patrick, how well is it going? I've been putting the idea forward. One NDP member loved it so much, Pierre Nantel, who's a friend of mine in Quebec MP, he put it out as a call in a letter to every leader. Said, are we ready to stand up? We like Elizabeth's idea. Jagmeet Singh said yes. Nobody else said yes. But Jagmeet and I did a press conference with Pierre Nantel to say we'll work together after the election. I mean, I wish we could work together before an election, but you know what? Elections Canada, the Elections Act makes it illegal to work together. Yeah, after the election, we can work together. But we had one Liberal MP show up and the Bloc, but we didn't get the Bloc leader. So that's where it's at right now. And then the second part of your question, I'm now forgetting, Patrick, sorry. Oh,
Oil and gas subsidies.
Oil and gas subsidies are, of course, Stephen Harper committed to ending oil and gas subsidies in Canada when he attended the G20 in Cincinnati in 2009. And the Liberal Party platform promised the same thing. The report that you referenced this week was from the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development under the Office of the Auditor General. They asked Finance Canada for what Finance Canada was doing to identify subsidies. Finance Canada can't figure out what a fossil fuel subsidy is. And Catherine McKenna has taken the position that spending $4.5 billion to buy the Trans Mountain Pipeline is not a fossil fuel subsidy. So they can't find them. You see, they'd cut them if they could find them. But with both hands and a flashlight, they can't find anything. So we will, of course, we want to get rid of fossil fuel subsidies. We want to get rid of fossil fuels. There is no point in talking about fracking. Fracking must be banned. By the way, you know, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick have moratoria on fracking. BC needs to have a moratorium on fracking, and we need to end it across the country.
Thank you so much, Chris. We're going to go over to the microphone over here.
Hi, my name's Jim. So what I've heard from Paul's introduction was briefly mentioning a just transition. Sort of, maybe could you elaborate more? Now, I haven't read the vision document, so it could be in the policy. But is there a Canadian version of the Green New Deal?
Yeah, Vision Green.
Yeah, the Green New Deal in the US, by the way, I mean, everybody loves AOC. It's just awesome. I love Bernie Sanders. Love the fact that people are finally talking about real things in US politics. God love them. But the Green New Deal is for the US.
Yes.
One of the things they are advocating, which is such a bold thing that they don't even know that they could get it, which is universal health care. Right, that's part of Green New Deal. I'm thinking, I'd love help and suggestions. We don't know what to call it. We could call it Vision Green.
Vision Green.
I'm thinking of calling it Green Mission Possible. But we need to say all our... Now, in terms of just transition, we've been bad at that historically in Canada. I'm from Atlantic Canada. When the cod moratorium, fishing cod, was brought in, 30,000 people lost their employment overnight. And they provided really bad subsidies to help individual fishermen deal with it. They'd say, you're going to get off, stop using the fish net and go to the internet. You think, oh God, that's bad, you know. So anyway, and then the other example is, which I think is very relevant to what we have to do with fossil fuels, is Quebec and asbestos. For decades, federal parties, including the NDP, everybody wanted to cater to the fact there are jobs in Quebec mining asbestos. Canada campaigned globally against requirements for prior informed consent before we exported a killing substance. The highest cause of occupational deaths globally, 100,000 deaths a year due to asbestos, and successive governments kept saying, well, other asbestos is dangerous, but this Canadian asbestos can be used safely, except not in Canada. And we were sending it to India and sending it to Vietnam and sending it around the world. Finally, it was Pauline Marois. It took a Quebec premier, Parti Québécois, Pauline Marois finally said, we're shutting down the asbestos industry. It was, of course, supported by subsidies, lots of them, and they have been providing support. So there's, of course, the community of Asbestos Quebec is trying to turn itself into a tourism business. It's not always perfect, but here's some really great examples. For one thing, we're going to have to clean up the mess left by the oil sands so that the guys driving the trucks full of dirt away from the oil sands can turn around and drive back. We have to fix the mess that was made. We also know that there are orphaned there are orphaned drilling holes, orphaned oil wells across BC, across Alberta. We now know from the Supreme Court of Canada that even in bankruptcy, those companies are not allowed to abandon them. They have to clean them up. But there's a First Nations community, Chief Leo Stonechild, I think it's, I'm trying to remember the name of his community. It's west of Calgary. And he's taken over some of these orphaned oil wells. Guess what they're great for? Geothermal. Because the highest cost of developing geothermal is the drilling. So we will figure it out, and I think the way it will probably come out in our platform, and I'll let Paul speak this, is a job guarantee. Because they're going to be, the problem we're facing in Canada isn't that we're going to have a lot of unemployed people. We're having a population that's mostly seniors. We have more jobs than we have people. So it's a question of making sure the people who want the jobs get the training they need and the mobility to where the jobs are. But there's nothing that delivers local jobs distributed right across the country, like the challenge of making sure every single building in this country is zero carbon, and most of them should be producing more energy than they use. So I'll see if you want to add to that, sorry.
I think you caught it all.
All right, okay.
I'm just going to check in on time, where we're. Okay. Okay.
Wait, okay, so I don't know who's
We'll go over
working.
here and then over here. That's okay?
In defense of the oil industry, or the heavy oil industry, I suggest you all go home, get your picks and axes, and take the asphalt out in front of your house, put down the gravel, and enjoy the dust. Thank you very much.
Okay. Can I suppose you're leaving, or you don't want to discuss this? All right, well.
Thank you for your insight. I'm going to invite you to respond to that in any case. I think it's appropriate. There was a statement, sort of a question, but we'll invite you.
The problem with carbon-based products is not using them for things like durable plastic. I mean, single-use plastic we would ban. Durable plastic, such as, we quite often get attacked, you're a hypocrite if you are active to get rid of fossil fuels, but you have plastics. Or you're a hypocrite if you have an asphalt driveway. There isn't a problem with using oil-based products unless you're burning them. Yeah. So if you want to burn up your driveway, I suggest you have a problem. If you're using oil-based products and not burning them, it's just part of a whole suite of other uses for a carbon molecule that's more valuable and less dangerous than burning them.
Thank you very much. My name is Chris Straw. This will be a spoiler alert. I'm president of Gabriola's Against Freighter Anchorages Society.
Oh, yeah.
So my question is for Paul, but I'd like to hear from Elizabeth as well, because I know your riding is facing a similar issue.
Yeah.
Simply put, I feel like it's safe to say that the whole Southern Gulf Islands region is at a bit of a crossroads at the moment, in that we've been seeing an increased use of many of the waterways for the anchoring of bulk freighters awaiting berths at Port of Vancouver. And the federal government has embarked on a study and a will be making recommendations about the future of the whole sort of infrastructure of anchorages outside of port authorities. And so, Paul, I want to know, and I'll be asking this question to the other candidates as well as I get the opportunity, what steps you would plan on taking in terms of representing Gabriola and Ladysmith and some of the other areas that are affected by this issue if you were to be elected.
Okay. Yeah, so when I grew up here, I bought my first boat when I was 11 years old, and I'd tootle around all these Gulf Islands, and I didn't see freighters hanging around anywhere. So what the problem is it's free parking. They have to pay in Burrard Inlet to anchor, and they don't have to pay here, and they are parking boats where there's a glut of freighters around the world right now, and they're the way that they're loading piecemeal because there's issues with grain, rail bringing grain to the terminals. So first of all, let's get rid of the free parking pass, and let's make them pay to anchor anywhere on the southern Gulf Islands and along the east coast of Vancouver Island. We also need to protect the ecosystem. So there are, having these anchorages and having these huge chains dragging along the bottom is destroying our ocean floor. So it's not really a sustainable thing to be doing to begin with. We need to look at the global trade issue around this about whether they're being efficient with what they're doing. And they need to be more efficient with how they're moving ships in and out of here. And the other thing is we've got coal coming from the United States to be shipped out of the lower mainland because American ports don't want it. And why don't they want it? Because they don't want coal trains flowing through, and they don't want major coal ports. Why are we doing it? There's no money in it for Canadians to be exporting coal out of the lower mainland. And I'm glad that the Surrey coal dock's been shut down. Like, that whole proposal is dead for now. I'm sure somebody's going to resurrect it. But the increase in coal shipments, they want to, we're talking about LNG Canada, but we also have wood fiber, the proposal to have wood fiber LNG out of Squamish. So next it's going to be LNG ships that are sitting here offshore. And then, going through these passages where they're basically like atomic bombs, floating through Georgia Strait, the Salish Sea, and Active Pass and other places. And this is ridiculous. We don't need this here. Add the bitumen exports and Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. Years ago, when I did the SPP film, one of the chapters in there was about the super corridors. And that was another conspiracy theory. Stephen Harper said, "Oh yeah, your super corridors, highways to the stars," or whatever, making fun of it. But that, like NASCO, the North American Super Corridor organization, which changed its name since, they still use the same NASCO thing. They proposed all of this, and Vancouver and the Lower Mainland was flagged as a major place to be flooding all of this material through for the west coast of North America, because it's a shorter shipping distance than it is from California. So policy around, what it is we're shipping out of these ports, making sure that the freighters are paying, making sure that they have efficiencies in how the freighters come in and out of our ports, and making sure that that there's efficiencies in the rail system as well, because CP is not getting grain to the grain elevators in a timely fashion. We had the loss of the Harper government got rid of the wheat board, sold it to Saudi Arabia, to a state-owned corporation, and that's just messed a lot of things up. So there's a lot of moving parts that need to be fixed with this. So I hope that answers your question.
Just to take it further, what will you be doing to try to bring that about?
Lobbying ministers, lobbying other members of parliament, and part of the way Elizabeth works and why she is so effective is that we have policies for the Green Party. It's right in front of the Vision Green. We don't heckle, we don't pound on our desk, we don't use ad hominem attacks, we treat other members of parliament respectfully, and we work across party lines for what's for the good of Canadians. and for the good of constituents. And so I will work and do my best. I think that those kind of actions and those ways of dealing with people on a human level and being respectful actually gets good results. And I think, you know, Elizabeth's been voted the most effective constituent MP by her peers year after year, and that's because of how she works. And I will behave the same way. You can count on me to behave that way, and I will work respectfully across party lines to get some action on this issue. Thank you.
I just say, this is a case where the Greens can be solid in saying what we're advocating is for a smarter economy, more productive, efficient use of the Port of Vancouver. I was meeting recently with executives from CN Rail. They say this is the logjam of log jams, not really about logs in this case, but the worst port, the most inefficient, the one with all the delays is the Port of Vancouver. I was meeting with them because of this issue, because when you look at what's backing up this traffic into our waters, it starts with, as Paul said, when we lost the wheat board, we lost the coordination of shipment. I don't know why CN and CP don't realize that growing grain is a seasonal activity where it culminates in the fall, but every year they seem to be surprised. They sell off rail cars and lay off workers. I still wish it was a Crown corporation, but they gave up on that in the 80s, and ever since then, CNCP are for-profit, and there's a big problem with transportation, but there's also, it's unacceptable. But the weird thing is, as unacceptable as it is for us to have to live with these freighters in our waters, these freighters often, they'll have 4 different holds. They go into the Port of Vancouver, they can fill 1 hold with grain. Then they come back here, cool their heels. The whole time they're bothering us in our waters, they're losing money. So the whole scheme is money losing, lose, lose, lose. And in an era of computers and being able to sort out, okay, the shipment's coming in, the ship can come get it, and it goes away. It would be more efficient and more money-making for everyone concerned. So the first time I briefed Mark Garneau when he became Minister of Transportation in November 2015, we went over this issue. I explained it to him. I go back, I explain it all the time. We've got the study. A study is hardly enough. But he's keenly aware that this is unacceptable. He's Minister of Transportation. So I often say, you know, it shouldn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, but he is a rocket scientist.
Thank you very much. We're going to take our last question over here. Please proceed.
I'm Sephora Grignon. I'm not a president of anything. I'm a food activist.
Yeah.
I think there are a few other food activists in the room, and I think many of us should become more aware of our food issues, so of our food supply. In Canada, the herbicide glyphosate has been allowed to be used until 2032. It's banned in many other countries in the world. Genetically modified foods, okay, the corporations will tell you it's the way to feed the world, but truly genetically engineered food depletes nutrients from the soil, takes, just pollutes the water, etc. So what I want to know is, what is the green? We never talk. It seems like we never talk about the food issue, and so that's why I'm here. What is the Green Party's stand on food?
Okay. You'll find in Vision Green a very complete presentation on how we have to move to a goal of local healthy food and protecting our farmers. The goal of Canada is a country, it's really interesting, that is essentially policy free. You can look at almost any area. We have no energy policy, we have no transportation policy. So just to say, our approach to governance is to say that every issue should be dealt with to figure out what, by consensus, what do we want as a national goal? Because we have divided jurisdiction. Most of agriculture issues and food issues are treated as provincial and local. On the other hand, so I'm going fast because I know we're near the end, but we want to create a table called the Council of Canadian Governments, which would include a place at the table for federal, provincial, territorial, representatives of municipalities, some big city mayors, some small, and a place at the table for Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. Every table would look at every issue. So we need to have an approach to food policy that takes into account what's our goal? Healthy food produced locally, sustaining farmers. Because the goal of agriculture and Agri-Food Canada right now is to maximize the export of Canadian stuff that might pass for food out of the country, and that means the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has a conflict of interest built into their mandate to promote the export of Canadian food products and protect the safety, which means that when we have things like the E. coli outbreak that occurred at the plant in Alberta, in Edson, Alberta a couple of years ago, CFIA waited a while because they don't want to hurt the reputation of Canadian food product being exported, because that's their goal, is to promote exports. So they don't necessarily have as their go-to place act on the precautionary principle. Now, quickly to glyphosate. This is something that occurs right through the government of Canada and the governments of provinces around the country. I will go out on a limb and say every single regulator, at least every single one I've encountered, has been captured by the industry they regulate. So Bayer and Monsanto have more sway over the decisions in Health Canada over glyphosate than the doctors and the researchers who say it's dangerous. We will ban glyphosate as soon as we have a balance of power in a minority parliament where everybody needs our vote.
So yeah, just really briefly, if you know about the work that I do in the community, I am a food activist. I have been working locally to promote the farmers markets, to promote local farmers. So if you look at some of the videos I've done, you can see on the Nanaimo Food Shares website, I've been promoting those kind of things, and I've been working on training young people in food production. So that whole program I was running at Nanaimo Food Share for 3 years was all about training in horticulture skills, food skills, teaching these young folks with barriers to employment and people with diverse abilities about nutrition, organic food growing. And we've had this 5-acre farm out at 933 Park Avenue. It's one of the last parcels. It's the only 5-acre parcel in Harewood that still produces food, and that was the first planned agricultural community in British Columbia, and we're working to save that. And we're also farming at the Westwood farm, the historic farm there. And my film, 5 Acres, is all about promoting local food, because Vancouver Island, we used to produce, almost 100% of what we consumed 50 years ago. It was around 75%, and now it's down to 3 to 5%. So we need to be growing more food. There's no reason why we need to import garlic pretty much anywhere in this country. It's something you can grow in the Yukon. My mother-in-law grew it up in the Yukon. We can produce food here. We can do it in a resilient and restorative way, which is what we need to do to combat climate change and create employment while we're doing it.
And you're also a gardener yourself.
Oh yeah, and I'm a gardener myself. I've dug up so many lawns for places I rented, and actually had a landlord bill me for taking my compost to the dump. So I'm so happy to be somebody that owns a piece of property now and can have permaculture.
So I'll take our last question over here, and that will really, unfortunately, will be the last one here today, but thank you so much for everybody who's come forward, so please proceed.
And I'm very thankful for the comments that you've made in the last few minutes, because they've answered some of my questions as well. Because I was wondering about the sort of stronghold that corporations have on government. And, and I wondered if there was any comment about the SNC Lavalin, in the sense that we've all seen this disgraceful treatment of a beautiful woman named Jodie, in my opinion. And I would wonder if you, this strong arming approach, and I'm sure it wouldn't be your approach, but I just wondered if you had something to say about it.
I was talking on Wednesday in Parliament with something we had called Daughters of the Vote, and 338 seats for MPs were occupied by young women. And one of the young women who was, actually she's a beautiful young woman wearing her niqab and talking about Islamophobia, but then talking about Indigenous women and seeing the parallels, and she ended up with, and it's so unfair that we look at the disproportionate presence